Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is Funeral Service Insider, the podcast from Kates-Boylston. Conversations worth having about the culture and business surrounding death care and end-of-life care. This week we are speaking with Michaelene Dowers. She runs a company called Pollen, which, among other things, curates death care-related books for children, but she does a ton of other things. I actually got in touch with her because of a story that I was working on about the Chattanooga Death Care Collective, which we will talk about. But during our conversations, I discovered that she's a traveling funeral director, which is a subject that has always interested me. She works for direct care companies, and she tells us all about how she got the gig and kind of calls into question whether you really have to, as an in-demand funeral director, accept what you're given. For her part, she got a bunch of different licenses and she can work anywhere and does. Enough of that from me. Let's speak with Michaelene right after this message from our friends and sponsors at Starmark.
Funeral service is more than a profession. It's a calling. Starmark understands the care, dignity, and efficiency you need to provide for the families you serve. That's why we specialize in sensible product solutions designed to meet your needs. If you're looking for sustainable, economical, and efficient container and casket solutions, Starmark is here to support you. Because presentation means everything, you deserve a partner you can trust. Starmark, the cremation solutions leader. Visit starmarkcp.com today and discover the difference.
Okay, so you initially came to my attention because of Pollen, which we will get to in a little bit. But before we get there, I do want to ask you about the fact that you are a traveling funeral director. So can you talk to me about like how you got into funeral service and where you went to school and what made you eventually kind of cross over into becoming a traveling funeral director, which is something that I mention every 6 weeks that I think is a fascinating way to do your job.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to Cypress College in Southern California years ago, and I thought I was going to be a California girl my whole life. That was not the case for many reasons. One of them is the cost of living in California. It's very high. And funeral director pay in Southern California at the time I went to school was not very high, and those things did not go together. So I got my funeral director's license, or at least took the test in California, and then I left, I think about 2 weeks later, to move to Indiana. Couldn't find a job there at all, and I went off to Wisconsin. Left my husband in Indiana. He eventually followed me, and then I realized that I'm going to follow the better offers, and that's something I feel that a lot of funeral homes don't understand is they want loyalty, but they don't want to pay for it. So I go where the money is because I cannot make, low wages forever. And as I moved across the country, either with my husband following me or me following him, I started picking up licenses. And then with the advent of the internet, of course, and online direct cremation providers, I started dabbling in that and getting comfortable and familiar with these kinds of firms and talking to them about what they're doing. And they're still funeral homes. They're still firms that deal in death care, and they still need somebody with a license to help them out. I've proposed myself to a couple of them, and a couple of them took me up on the offer. And I just kept getting licensed. And now I'm licensed in 11 states and currently working on state 12 and 13 at the moment. And I should be testing for those in the next month or two. So.
That's great. So let's just quick locate ourselves in time. When did you get your first funeral director's license?
California was 2014. So not that long ago.
Yeah. And so as you were, it takes a lot of, I've moved like let's say 5 times in my life. I haven't moved a lot because that's a big jump to go and then to start looking. And so the jump to Indiana, did you was that like with your husband, or did you both think you'd be able to find work there and he was the only one that had enough luck? Like, how did that work? And then going forward from there, how did you choose what state? And
my husband was an aircraft mechanic at the time. He had just got out of the Marines. And with that, we basically made a deal saying whoever gets a job first out of the state, that's where we're going to go. And he won. He went to Indiana and he contracted there for a bit. And I followed him and I kept hearing from a couple of firms in Indiana, I'm sorry, we can't hire you. You don't sound like us. You won't fit the mold of what we need. Even one in rural Indiana going so far as saying women don't wear trousers in these parts. And I said, well, I'm not wearing a skirt to pick up a dead body. So no.
Wow.
You know, very conservative, which is perfectly fine for them, less fine for me, especially in terms of making me do manual labor in certain types of clothes. So because I didn't quite fit in the mold of Indiana, I went off to Wisconsin and left the husband behind for a few months. He followed. And then it just turned into a matter of offers you can't refuse after that. So after Indiana, where I didn't work, I went to Wisconsin about a year later and started working at firms in, I'd say the Fox Valley area. So think Green Bay, Oshkosh out there.
Mm.
Husband got an offer in Minnesota for a significant raise. I had to finish my bachelor's degree because Minnesota is a bachelor's degree state for licensure. Got that one, went out there, got pregnant with my daughter a couple years later, and found out how much daycare costs in Minnesota for an infant and said, I can't do this because I would have just been working for daycare,
Right.
losing money, and there'd be no point. But I'll be damned if I was going to, stay at home with the baby. So he went out and got another offer he couldn't refuse and moved us to Seattle. Worked in the Seattle market for quite a while. Loved it. Made all of my connections there. And then COVID happened. And that's when I started making those really, really solid connections with the online providers.
And it's I don't think I've interviewed, I think, one person before who was primarily working for online providers. So how did you get yourself in, and then how did you find more opportunities as that went forward? Was it really just cold calling and saying, hey, I know you're busy and I'm willing to be licensed in these states?
I knew the recruiter for this one particular company that had already been working for, and he called me out of the blue after I had I hate to say a bad incident, but that's the nice way of putting it, where I ended up saying, I'm not doing this, and I went and worked somewhere else. And he kept calling, and the recruiter caught me on a bad day where I was upset about something and getting ready to move. And he said, please, please just interview. And I said, I don't want this. I don't like your company. And he said, please. And I said, fine. So I talked to the hiring manager who told me what it was and then dangled the carrot of you don't have to put on a suit or leave your house. And I said, I don't have to talk to people at 2 a.m. He said, no. And I said, okay, sold. Work-life balance with a new child is key. And I wasn't having it beforehand. So the opportunity arose and I took it, and then we moved again, or we're preparing to move again. And we just thought, this is a great idea. I could do this from anywhere. And things went, of course, downhill with that company specifically because I should have gone with my gut. I didn't. But I knew I was capable of taking a call volume of like 80 cases a week alone, because you don't have that need for, special disposition. It's strictly cremation and strictly direct, and they're usually not asking for anything else. And because of my skills across the country, I'm able to talk to families everywhere and understand, various laws, rules, and regulations. Like, for example, I was sitting in Indiana. This was the second time I lived there. I was sitting in Indiana talking with a woman who lost her husband in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I had just sold a home. And she was sitting in a house 2 blocks away from where my parents lived in California. So I was very familiar with the laws in each of those states. And I told her that. And she said, well, fun fact, we just found my brother's dead wife's cremated remains under the coffee table. What can I do? So I organized everything for her, going above and beyond the regular direct cremation, did all the paperwork, and made sure that when she showed up to the Veterans Cemetery at Fort Snelling, her deceased brother and his wife's cremated remains were going at the same time, something that not even funeral home firms can do. But I was able to do it because I had those connections already from the local area. And where the wife was cremated, I had gone drinking basically with their admin staff at one point and knew who they were. So,
Yeah, it worked out.
right. And that's not true to everything, but it helped. Those connections helped. And even after leaving the company, I was still very much driven to work from home, of course, because I got a little spoiled. So I started teaching funeral service, got connected in there. And, word gets around once you're teaching and all your students are across the country. So one day I found a listing for a care team person remotely for funeral service. And I applied, and the manager said, "You're much better than being on a care team. Do you want to be the funeral director in charge? And we can talk about a self-done contract." I sent them one of my contracts for consulting and they agreed, and off we went. So, and that was, gosh, 2.5 years ago, I think.
So, a couple things. First of all, let's talk about the having your own contract already for, I guess, when you were doing independent funeral directing
Mhm.
wherever you were living.
Yeah. I realized that I need to protect myself. Having my own contract where I have a friend who's a lawyer who went over it, tied up any loopholes that could be seen. I mean, I feel like every funeral director at some point who isn't related to the company has had a bad experience. And that's really unfortunate, especially the young ones. Um, but because of those past bad experiences, I knew what I needed to close up and what I didn't want to happen in the future with somebody else. Also with teaching, you have students who, instead of doing their tasks that they're supposed to do, would sit there and find the loopholes instead so that they
Hmm.
don't have to do it and spend more time doing that. So I'm very good at tying up loose ends and loopholes and making sure that my contracts are pretty solid. It's just a matter of being gutsy enough to propose the contract to a company and see what they say. You have to put the value in what you do. And I'd like to assume I'm pretty valuable at this rate.
So, can you give me a couple examples of things that you thought were important to put in the contract?
Oh, parameters on when I can be called. Um, you know, a lot of firms that do this online thing, there's so many of them out there these days, but a lot of them hire people who aren't licensed and they have one or two licensed people working, which is fine.
Hmm.
But as the licensee, I need to be firm in what the requirements are for the state and what my requirements are. So, for example, disposition in certain states has to be 5 days, other states it's 3, some it's 7. Some I just need to have paperwork filed and I have to stick to that. And I have to be strong enough to tell the team, like, no, you need to have this done by this time. I don't care about what other people say or what you're doing. This is my license. And then the contract needs to have things in place that make sure that the rules are followed and that they can't circumnavigate the rules or what's in the contract. Negotiating pay, knowing one's worth is so important. Um, I'm still, after all these years, working on the fact of never downplaying myself and to knowing my own worth. And it's a hard task because, at least as a woman, you're taught young to, you know, be kind, be quiet, be a helper,
Hmm.
and to self-sacrifice a lot. And unfortunately, a lot of, at least women in funeral service, have self-sacrificed themselves so much that they don't really remember who they are and they don't know their own value. And they're waiting for others to validate them and give them value. And that's not going to happen, really. So,
And the other question was, as you started to pick up these different licenses, what are the upsides and downsides of being licensed in eventually, I guess, 13 states, right? By the time this comes out, it'll probably be
probably
13 states.
it'll probably be 13 states by the time this comes out, hopefully. And the upside, I can consult with families in all of these states. I can talk to funeral homes in all of these states. Um, I'm in various organizations out there, not just funeral director organizations, but Home Funeral Alliance, cremation societies, these kinds of groups that want to help with disposition and help families learn what they need to ask. Um, and knowing the law is most important, to make sure everybody's valid and heard. And I feel that having these licenses is also legitimizing myself. I mean, if I'm not licensed in a state, I really shouldn't be talking about that state because I don't know.
Mm.
Um, and we all have to start somewhere. I'm I'm never going to say that I'm an expert on a state that I just got licensed in a month ago, but I do know with enough research and education, I can get there. So,
And is this something that you'd recommend to a younger funeral director to look to try to get in multiple states, or to move to multiple states and then see, like, is this something that's very specific to you, or is this something you see happening or believe should at least be happening more often?
um, I think this is very specific to me. However, I do think that every director has a place that they fit into. One of the schools I taught at many years ago, um, the a colleague of mine said you would to a student, you would never work in my firm. You have all these tattoos and stuff. And the poor student started crying because helping people is all she ever wanted to do. And she thought this was her way in. And I told that student, I go, you know what, maybe that firm that she's talking about that she works for isn't for you, but there is a firm for you. It might not be in conservative parts of the US. It might be somewhere else like Seattle or Portland or, in a city area where tattoos and piercings are acceptable. Personalities might mesh better. And with me, when I started out, I wasn't covered in tattoos. I sure am now, but I also don't walk into ultra conservative funeral homes now, but I have that privilege of being able to be this way after being in the field for, gosh, well over a decade at this point, to pick and choose what I'm doing. So do I necessarily recommend it for everybody? No, it's hard. Testing for the states is not the hard part. The hard part is doing the paperwork, requesting your records from each state to send to that one new state. And we all know that cemetery and funeral boards of various states don't work on your time. They work on their own time, and emails get lost or paperwork sent gets deposited directly into shredders and not even looked at. So you have to have the type of personality to be on it, to loop the right people into the right emails, and to be kind yet firm. Um, I wouldn't have been able to do this right out the gate 10 years ago. There's no way. This is something that I feel I can only do after I've had the experience in all of these places. So,
But I think that knowing that it's a possibility is important for other funeral directors, because I don't know how well publicized this idea of, working for direct firms in multiple states from home is.
one thing that really made me think a little bit harder about it is think about the northeastern part of the United States. The states out there are very small. They border multiple other states. I mean, you could be across the state of Vermont or New Hampshire in an hour and a half at most. There's no reason for you to not be licensed in the state you live in as well as the states that touch it. So
Right.
why would that not be true to other regions in the US?
I live 8 blocks from Delaware.
Right. So there you go.
And I buy stuff, and then you do have to. Eventually, you learn that there are different rules in different states, and
Right.
it's not that complicated after practice. I did want to ask you though about the arrangement conferences, like how how radically different, or are they only mildly different from arrangement conferences when you were working in the funeral homes?
There, it depends on a family by family basis. When you're doing the online direct cremation, there really isn't an arrangement conference. But when you have families that want to chat it out, that's fine. I've had places where they want to do video chat or just over the phone or strictly through email. And personally, I leave it up to the family what they want to do. But if you think about what happened during COVID and all these funeral homes closed, but people didn't stop dying and they didn't stop needing to be heard either.
Mm,
So I did a lot of video conferences with families who could not, by law, come into the firm. And I'd sit with them and I'd still ask all the right questions. It took a little bit of adaptation,
mm,
even setting up services for well in advance for when the world opened back up, or cremating somebody and knowing that the memorial service isn't going to be for 6 to 12 months when the world opened up again.
mm,
And you can still maintain it and do things in that way, just like you would if they were sitting right in front of you. But just like we as funeral directors, a lot of us need to be chameleons in the arrangement conference to switch from a deceased grandma who was 95 years old to a deceased 20-year-old who got hit by a car 3 hours later. We need to be able to adapt to these families that we serve, whether it be cause of death, age of deceased, religion, or anything. So it was just one other thing. I mean, think about a family living in New York and I'm sitting in Portland.
Right.
And they're not going to, if they can't afford it, they can't afford it. And somebody's still physically dead in my location. I have to do something. And it's going to be phone calls, emails, text messages, everything. You do what you have to. And I've thankfully been able to adapt to that really well. And others have too.
Join Kates-Boylston on November 12th for the Advances in Funeral Innovations Detroit Conference. This is a must-attend event for funeral professionals ready to embrace the future of funeral service. The event brings together renowned industry leaders for expert-led presentations and engaging discussions designed to help you stay ahead of emerging trends, sharpen your marketing strategies, streamline your operations, and deliver more personalized, meaningful services. Plus, you'll have the opportunity to network with fellow professionals, exchange ideas, and gain fresh perspectives that can elevate your business. Speakers include Danielle Burmeister, Vice President of Marketing Communications at Homesteaders Life Company, presenting Maximizing Team Performance Through Accountability and Alignment. Will Bischoff, Senior Vice President of Strategic Markets for Homesteaders Life Company, will present The Funeral Finance Roadmap, Strategies to Fund What's Next. Stephanie Castagnier-Dunn, Chief SBA Revenue Office, Phoenix SBA, a community bankshare company, will present The Silver Tsunami, The Coming Wave of Business Transactions. Matt Van Drimmelen, owner and founder of Full Circle Aftercare, will present Getting ROI Out of Aftercare at Your Funeral Home, Turning Compassion into Long-Term Value. Tom Cole, Vice President of Sales of Federal Eagle, and Nathan Hurst, National Sales Manager of Federal Eagle, will present Benefits from Funeral Car Innovation. Click on the link below for more information and to register. And I want to ask you, at what point did you start Pollen, which is a whole separate, I'm sorry, I guess for people who aren't familiar, could you tell us what Pollen is and when you started it and why?
Yeah, Pollen is my company that I started where I curate children's grief literature. I'm putting the other things I do under the same Pollen umbrella as well. That part of my website hasn't been quite worked out yet. It's in the process. But the main overarching theme of Pollen is children's grief resources. And I started this because one day my daughter was getting put to bed and her dad was out of town. I think he was in like Philadelphia or something.
Mm-hmm.
And we were FaceTiming and his phone cut out. And she goes, "Oh, I guess Dad's dead." And I said, "Excuse me?" And she goes, "Yeah, Dad's dead. His phone died." And I go, "That's not how that works, Chloe." She goes, "Well, what do you mean?" I go, "Well, first of all, it's bedtime. Nice try trying to stay awake. But things that can be touched that aren't alive cannot die. So we as adults really need to be aware of what we're saying to kids. My cell phone didn't die. My remote didn't die. It was never alive in the first place. What dies? People, animals, plants. So I'm becoming more cognizant of the words I'm using. And then I milled about on the idea of Pollen. And then I think probably 2 months later, we sent my kid off to my mom's house in another state. And my mom calls me one night and goes, "So Chloe asked about Milo, the cat, who had since been put to sleep because he was old, you know?"
Mm.
And Chloe looks at my mom and goes, "Well, Grandma, why didn't you just change his batteries?" Well, Chloe has a little cat toy that's orange that you put batteries in and it works just fine. And my mom had to explain to her, well, Milo is not a toy. He was an animal. He was alive. And I thought about it and I said, there's so many kids out there that aren't getting proper information. And one thing that the United Kingdom is doing is they're starting to put education on grief and death in schools.
Just saw that this morning.
Yeah. And I was out there for the NAFD convention. Was that last May? Like a year and a half ago, probably. And they were talking about this and having legislation done so that the education is out there to help the kids. And I know New Jersey has something like this now, but other states don't really have this. And in talking to parents out there, they have no clue what to tell their kids. And when they're in the throes of grief themselves, they're over their own, say, mother dying, they're not going to know what to say to their child about dead grandma. So here I am. I have all these books and children's literature resources to fit all sorts of grief, every type of death, every relationship, and almost every religion mainstream religion you can think of to make sure that when a Muslim 6-year-old loses their dad in a car accident, that kid can properly grieve and be educated in a way pursuant to their family's wishes. I do talks out there about children's grief and explaining death to children. I mean, we all as directors and death care people have probably heard grandma's sleeping or she went to be with Jesus. And unfortunately, saying those things really messes the kids up, or it could. I get a lot of pushback from the religious type who say, well, it's comforting to say that grandma went to be with Jesus, which I get, but they're not understanding, where do you see Jesus? You see Jesus at church. That's what they tell kids. And if grandma's service is in a casket in church on Sunday and they come back the following Sunday and grandma's casket is gone, they have some questions.
Right.
Or they're going to be afraid of going to church because, well, grandma was here and then she was gone and she was taken by the Lord. I don't want to be taken by the Lord. I'm not going to church, you know? So we have to be very cognizant in all backgrounds of what's going on with these kids and what we're saying. And even to those who aren't religious, like in my own house, there's ways to, tell a kid of any age about death and grief without lying or being scary and still being informative, educational at their age level.
Well, yeah, and I think one of the things where grown-ups can kind of fall down is that almost everything else you ever tell a kid is easy enough to be digested in 3 or 4 bites.
Right.
And this doesn't have a short answer. And I think too often we're not comfortable giving kids long, complex answers, and rather it's easier to take a shortcut answer that you can amend at a later time.
Right.
But in the meantime, they're half confused, and that half confusion stays part of their memory.
Right. And also, I mean, there's people out there who say, oh, well, they're too young to remember. I had a family, I can't even remember what state I was in, but I had asked them at the arrangement, are there any kids in the household we would need to worry about? Do I need to give any tours of the facility or anything? And they said, well, we have our 5-year-old son and we just haven't told him grandma died. And I said, when are you going to do that? And they're like, we were hoping he would just forget. And I'm like, just forget grandma existed. Okay. No, we're not going to do that. And the reason why is like these kids, they're not stupid. They're not
Yeah.
stupid. Research shows that mourning occurs early on from like infancy. If there's an infant and the mother dies and that infant had been breastfeeding off the mother, the connection is there, even though it's faint and it's hard to define. It's still there. That child has the scent of the mother, the taste of the mother's milk. And now things are changing. Routine is changing. They're going to grieve, maybe not in a recognizable way that we as adults would recognize, but they're still going to grieve in some way, shape, or form. And then they're going to have questions when they're 5. I mean, this kid's going to show up and go, there's mommy-daughter dance or whatever. Where's my
Right.
mom? So you have to have these conversations. And I highly recommend that people have these conversations early. There's resources, there's board books, I'm staring across the room at my house right now. I have stuffed animals that are meant for grief with little board books for 3-year-olds to sit down and give them very bare basics of the word sadness. Like, it's a start.
Yeah. And kind of along those lines, there is, as you said, a little bit more to Pollen. You're adding other things that you do there. One of the things that we've spoken about recently for a different, but an extended story, I guess, is the Chattanooga Death Care Collective. And you'd already mentioned that sometimes you work with home funeral alliances. And can you talk to me about this kind of openness to alternative grief and death care and how you see that playing out in rural America even? I mean, Chattanooga aside.
Yeah. So when the hurricane came and destroyed Asheville, a friend of mine who is a death doula here in Chattanooga, her and I sat down and we were talking about what was going on. And she said, why can't we be the next hub of death care? There's so many Appalachian folk here who are interested in, what you would call green burial, but it's just natural. It's what we've been doing since the dawn of time. And it got changed with, of course, funeral homes. A lot of people who don't trust funeral homes exist too. And why can't we care for our own dead? So I'm actually on the board of the National Home Funeral Alliance. I help them with their, of course, laws, rules, and regulations, because even if they're doing home funerals, there's still requirements that have to be met in various states. And with the Chattanooga Death Care Collective, we're looking to educate people in our local community about death, dying, and bereavement. We're bringing our own spin on it, talking about doulaship, talking about home funerals, talking about green burials, all the different modes of disposition that are legal all across the country. Um, and we had a death over drafts a couple weeks ago at a local brewery here where we had, not a lot of people, but 5 people showed up, and we got to talk about grief and what's truly important in families when somebody's dying, and where we see ourselves going once we die, and how we want to help our families along the way. So it's a very small movement right now, but it is growing.
You find that you're getting even the 5 people, are they, like, how engaged are they, and how, because one of the difficulties that we spoke about with the doula movement is the lack of reliable, I guess, certification. Like the difference between someone who's trained and someone who's proclaiming that they're a death doula is one of the things that kind of holds it back, I think, a little bit as a profession in places.
Right. And I know I'm probably going to get a lot of flack on this, but I feel that certification of some kind, some uniform certification, is really going to legitimize death doulaship. I mean, currently you have people that are like, pay $50 for a 20-hour class, or pay $8,000 to take, a 6-week course, and it's across the board. They can all call themselves death doulas, and that's fine. But if they've never A, seen a dead body, or B, done a burial of any kind, I think there needs to be some legitimacy. And that's not to say that they shouldn't be helping their own families out, but once you put yourself out there publicly, you should probably know a thing or two.
Mm-hmm.
That's my stance on it, and that's not the stance of everybody, but the Death Care Collective, we are welcoming all viewpoints and discussions on that. And we're just currently educating the general public at this time. But I think a national certification personally, or a licensure of some kind, would make sense. I mean, we license our funeral directors.
Well, and also, in addition to licensing our funeral directors, many, including you, go on and get celebrant certification. And you could just start calling yourself a celebrant if you felt like it.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
it's not like you haven't been to enough funerals to figure out how it kind of goes. But there is something important about making the effort to go beyond the facade, but go beyond what you just see right in the beginning.
Right. You need to be able to really look deeper into what's going on around you. I mean, it's not just a matter of walking in, seeing a dead body, and either in celebrancy or in doulaship, and say, "Oh, I got work to do. I'm going to do these things," because every family has their deep intricacies that you don't know about, and you need to ask the right questions. You need to do it delicately, and that's something that funeral directors are pretty well trained to do for the most part, and they evolve over time, of course. So, you know, having some sort of background, I feel, is quite important. I think a licensure for everything should be good, but I'm one of those law people, who really likes rules. So,
You like to know that the person who's saying they're going to do something is qualified to do it. It's not,
oh gosh, yes,
not too much to ask.
I hate to use the term militant, but I am not a rule breaker these days. I'm too tired for that, and there's too much risk in it. If things aren't set out in stone, there's way too much risk. I mean, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but that's the reason I don't like working for family-owned firms. I mean, when HR is the owner's wife and my boss is the owner's husband, there's too much room for error.
Right.
I like what I like about corporations, although obviously they're not perfect in any way. Like there's an HR department somewhere.
Right, and at least a one that knows where the company's risks really are, and
Right.
isn't going to say, "Yeah, we'll probably get away with it this time, but next time we should be more careful."
Right.
That's not something a corporate HR person is going to say.
Right. And that's where I say get my joy in life, because that's really sad. But that's where I get my enjoyment in working is I know where the box is, and know where I can step. In
And that
family-owned firms, you don't always know. So
and that also with your bringing your own contract to the table certainly is a good place to start. And that's actually all I have for you, unless you have something else for me. Is there something I should have asked and didn't, or something you wanted to say or thought you'd get a chance to say and I didn't provide it?
Oh gosh, I don't think so. I mean, I think we've all covered everything. I'm open for families and firms to contact me if they have any grief needs. I mean, I do electronic death certificate filing for various companies here and there not as their director in charge. I do consulting for repatriation. I do some celebrancy stuff, not a lot, but if asked, you know. So
Yeah, I guess you never met a test that you were too afraid to take. How does that sound?
that's true. Now I hate to say you take one, you take them all, but yeah, they're pretty similar. You just have to make sure the laws are the same or very similar in the other states. And I'm getting higher education. I'm working on a PhD right now, and everything education wise I've done has been death care related. And back in the day, I was told, "Oh, that's stupid. Don't even bother. It's so useless." But you know what? I think it's been pretty useful so far. It's gotten me to where I'm at now, and I'm not sitting behind a desk making, minimum wage at a funeral home.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great.
Funeral service is more than a profession. It's a calling. Starmark understands the care, dignity, and efficiency you need to provide for the families you serve. That's why we specialize in sensible product solutions designed to meet your needs. If you're looking for sustainable, economical, and efficient container and casket solutions, Starmark is here to support you. Because presentation means everything, you deserve a partner you can trust. Starmark, the cremation solutions leader. Visit starmarkcp.com today and discover the difference.
Funeral Service Insider, the podcast, has been a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. Please subscribe wherever you're listening now. You can follow if you're on Apple. All you have to do is hit the little plus button up top and you will be notified every time a show goes out. If you have any feedback, we are always happy to get it. Lots of the feedback that I get from folks, from listeners, is kind of like confidential. Like, I like this, I don't like this, and this is why. And that's fine. I do not have to reveal where any of my voicemails or emails come from, but I will mention you if you'd prefer to be mentioned. Either way, you can reach me by either clicking through to the show notes and then on my email, or by calling 732-746-0233. That is 732-746-0233, extension 709. And that will do it this time for Funeral Service Insider, the podcast.